Okay, hi. I made some changes for lighting here. I'm not sure if it's good or bad. Okay. Okay. So today, to be honest, there is this idea that at the moment. Okay, so this is our service, and basically you're generating some blocks. So nothing really crazy, but this is all automated and based on the latest news. For example, this was generated tonight. Yeah, for example, AWS outage and other stuff. So at the moment, it's like the really basic idea. We automated block generation basically every day. We scrape some web pages, and then based on those, we just generate this block. So nothing really crazy, but the idea that I have is to make it into a product. And for that, I think some changes need to be made. And the main thing is that at the moment it's really coupled, I would say. So if this is our the whole system, let's say, this would be this would be, for example, blog generation. And what else do we have? Oops. And for example, let me think. So we have the part for generating block, and then there's a part for API. And basically, this, let me see. Okay, so the block generation calls the API. Basically, it says here is the block that we have now, and please now save it into database. And when someone, for example, goes to the website, the blog page, they see the blog as well. So that's the whole idea that's happening now. But the problem is that this is not like, how am I gonna sell it to users? That's a whole question. And we also have this another part. Okay, let me make it bigger. Yeah, so we also have this another part for, let's say, the UI. And this is basically, this also talks to API. Yeah. So, for example, the whole idea of a frontend is that we request the API service in a sense, and basically it will bring the blog posts, and then we show it in UI. So, and whenever someone comes to the website, we pull out the blog that has been generated, and then we show them. And this is at the moment a bit fixed. Mainly the blog generation. I think the main issue would be fixed prompts. Yeah. So this is a problem at the moment, because we want to kind of have the idea that people with different niche, they can, or different domain, they can just set up their own prompt, and then this whole workflow of creating the block generation would be done using those prompts, or like those configurations basically that the user makes. So that's the whole idea behind the this change now. And the problem at the moment for me is, how should I reform the entire thing? Because later we also might need to we basically have to form it into microservices. And again, it's for me a bit like questionable. Okay, what's really a microservice, and then what's the idea behind it, and so I'm also not an expert in microservices. Basically, what I want to do is to learn and make our product, change it a bit and bring it to a microservice architecture, so that we can have more users, and every user can have their own configuration, and then these blocks will be generated based on their domain, based on their like configs in general. So that's the whole idea. And at the moment, this block generation part is done by N8N, which is not a good idea, I would say, regarding the scalability, right? That's also a huge problem, I would say. For example, let me show you. So let's say, okay, so this is my resources that my VPS production server is using at the moment. I'm going with a really cheap service. I think it's €2, like $3 or something. So this is really cheap, only 2 gigabytes of RAM and only 2 CPUs. So this is super cheap and super like, low end, because at the moment I'm not sure regarding the users and the scalability and all of those things. So what I want to do, I want to say this. The problem is, for example, when a workflow for generating block is ran, basically this memory would peak and things would get like really like used to the maximum capacity. So basically one N8N workflow would just kill the entire server, and this would bring the chance to crash the server, and our server would be like inaccessible through internet. So at the moment this is a bit like a liability. And also the problem is that here in our block generation pipeline, N8N basically doesn't have any configuration. So I can say, okay, user 1 should use this configuration, user 2 should be using this configuration, and maybe it's done, it can be done in this sense. But the problem is, 2 users or like multiple workflows, if they want to run, then there would definitely be a problem. And I think that's the main problem that you are having. Or if you want to make it like a service, that would definitely become a problem. Okay. And so I'm thinking how we can change stuff, because in the end, so this is, let me write something here. Okay, the text. Yeah. Okay, so this is the current setup, and can you have some color? Yeah. Okay, so this is the current setup, and I want to move from this. So here it is. A little bit smaller. So at the moment, this is how our service is working. Okay, so this is the current setup, and now we can, yeah, okay. So this is the current setup, and what I wanted to do is, let's say, I would say the goal architecture, basically. So, okay, so yeah, the final architecture, I would, yeah, it's a bit still for me problematic. Like, I have no clue, to be honest, but we'll figure it out. So I'm thinking to make the our API service okay. So this would be the API service, and then there should be a, let's say, a database that it stores like user, and then configs, like the prompts, and for example, the competitors, competition URL, and in general, this should be used for creating the blog. So let's say we have this here, and then the API should change getting the gets the configuration, and this also would be like a service, basically part of this configurations. Let me just do this. Configs from competition, and then, for example, let's say, how should I say it? The intervals. Yeah, so there's also an interval, and then, for example, every day, the API should be ran. So, for example, we say intervals, Yeah, so every interval you also have the block generation here. But it's also the question, should I put the block generation here or somewhere else? The API, where should be the core API? Basically, this would be maybe the scheduler. For example, at what time, like which date or what intervals are we gonna generate the block? So this would be like scheduler API. And then generation API. So yeah, so generation API, and then the scheduler would call it. Yeah, I'm kind of a bit questioning it. Should I merge the scheduler API and generation API? Are they two separate business logic or not? Generation API, and then so it should be okay, so generation API would just call the database, and basically when it starts, the scheduler would say, hey, generation API, please generate some blocks based on this user configuration. And then this user would ask the database regarding the configuration, and then this would run. And now okay, so schedule API, generation API. What else do we need? But there's also the question, someone from outside, for example, let's say we want to build our own website. The current website that is working based on this service. Yeah, how would it change? That's the question. Like at the moment, I would say so. I have to somehow deliver it. Basically say, hey, by the way, this is the configuration that you set up. Based on the configuration, we are now, let's say, an interval every day, and then we create a blog. This would be the pipeline, and then we save it into our database, and also we could also say notify users API, or notify users, let's say, social media. Say specify that we say, okay, by the way, for example, we generate a blog, and after it's finished, we see what configuration has the user already specified. So then we say, okay, this is the endpoint that we should call for the user, and they would get notified whenever a request comes in. It means that they kind of got access through, basically they got a new blog post generated for them, and then they can do whatever they want with it. So the whole idea of creating, automating blog generation, I would say. And then I think this would work. And then based on some commands, we can generate the blog, and then blog generation. We could also make this a separate thing. Bring it here. We add another one, and we say notification. So basically this would be so the blog generation pipeline is just gonna generate the blog. So that's the idea. And then the notification is basically another logic, I would say, because how to notify the user that, hey, your blog has been generated. So that's, I would say, it's another separate another service we can kind of carve out of this. So this would kind of make sense at the moment. Yeah, and then we again check the database, check the configuration, and then we say, hey, this is the notification that should be sent. And we basically notify the user either with the APIs or, for example, the social media. Let's say, hey, by the way, we have this new blog post generated for you. This is how you can access it, or here's the link to visualize it. And so I think this would work. So at the moment, I think I'm a bit confident that this is, probably gonna be problems, but at the moment, I think this would be a reasonable services like carved out of the current setup. So basically, this blog generation, this whole thing is now broken down into multiple services, I would say. And now with these services, it also adds the configuration part that at the moment is missing. So user can configure what are the prompts, what are the niches, like what's the domain, is it fitness, is it news, or whatever. And this can easily give them control that they want. And that's, I think this would work. I hope. Okay. So this is how we're gonna handle it, I would say. The current setup is just one n8n workflow that has some fixed prompts and fixed settings. And then this will generate some blogs every, let's say, every day based on some news articles. And then the API would be called so that it notifies that, hey, there's a new post. There's a new post, and please save it in your database or whatever. And then there's also the UI that shows it to the user when they come to the website. So at the moment, this is the whole idea. But now I kind of want to carve out the core functionality of the blog generation. I want to also give it the option to configure this whole pipeline. So this is how the final architecture would look like. And there's a database, there's a scheduler API that has the the really detailed configuration when to run the pipeline, the blog generation pipeline. And after we generate the blog, we will call the notification service, and then they, based on the configuration, user would be notified. Either this would be, for example, on the website API that say, hey, whenever there was a new blog, send me the text, like some tags or something with it. And then we also can send the notification for user in social media that say, hey, by the way, this is your blog that has just been created. You can check it out here, for example. And the idea is that the current website that we are having, it has to reform and work with this whole architecture. So we want to go with this, the current setup. We want to accept or take in the final architecture, the new architecture. And then this also needs to, our current website needs to be changed. So I would say that yeah, okay, so this is the changes that we have to make to our website. And for that, I think the current API is kind of good, because the blog generation would also send it to the website that you're having. So basically, if I just carve out this part, like change our blog generation, break it down into these whole configuration, then if I use the current API, then it also would work, because so basically this part would be out. But yeah, this part would be out, and then I think all we have to do basically is connect this into the API that you're having in our current website. So I think this is how, okay, so with this new architecture, we moved from the current setup, and this is this box, to the final architecture, or like the goal architecture that you want to reach. And basically what we have done is broken down this blog generation pipeline into multiple services. For example, now this is also at the moment with n8n, and yeah, so okay, this is the current setup of the website that you're having here. We're generating blogs, we're happy and everything. And then this blog generation at the moment is not really dynamic, or you can't really configure it. Basically, all the prompts are fixed, all the settings are fixed, so there's no changes actually. And now we want to break down this blog generation into multiple services. So there would be one scheduler API. This is handled already, I think, by cron tab with N8N, like when to run a workflow. And we need a service to handle this part. And then for example, every day or every few hours, we call the blog generation pipeline. And we say, hey, please generate the blogs based on the configs that you can see on the database. For example, the prompts, the competition URL, the intervals, or in general, like the settings that are related to the blog generation pipeline. And then in the other service, the user should be notified. So basically, user can set up their own API, say, hey, whenever there was a new blog, call this API and then send me the text, for example, and I will add it on my website. This is, again, won't be our problem because the user should take care of it. And then we can also send the notification through the social media and say, hey, by the way, your new blog has been generated. This is the link to view it if you're interested. And maybe we can just say automatically call the API and also let the user know. So basically they know what has been posted on their website. And then with the current setup, we have to remove the blog generation pipeline from it, break it down into this architecture. And the only thing that we have to do is basically call the API here on our current setup. So after all of this, we're going to call the API, and then the API would save the blog into the database of our website. And on the UI, we can also see it. So basically, this website that you're having at the moment, the private kernel, the idea is this would be our first use case. So if you have, if you figure out this part, then basically this would be easily integrated into other user services. For example, they want to have a blog post about whatever niche, for example, fitness, news, or whatever. They can easily come here, configure, and then say, hey, send me a blog every day, for example. So by being our first customer of this architecture, we kind of would get the proof of concept that this architecture would work. And this would be just an example that there would be a website, there would be like some different sections of it, but then only the blog part is handled by our infrastructure or like the service. So basically anyone can say, hey, I will set up this API and I will use your pipeline for generating blogs. And then in the end, just call this API or let me know on social media. And then we can just generate it and send it to the user. And for example, this would be an example website, and then they would show it here, for example. So I think this would make much sense. Okay, so okay. But then the problem is I think now the problem is to break down the N8N workflow into like a service and handle it purely using Python. The problem that we had with N8N is that it's not scalable. So if you ask yourself, can this workflow, for example, in this case, blog generation pipeline, can this workflow run for 100 users. And at the moment with the current setup, for example, we see, for example, in our server, the answer is definitely no. So the n8n should kind of be changed and be implemented purely on some other workflow management. At the moment, I also have LangGraph in mind, which I've already used for other services, and I think this would be a solid option, like a replacement for n8n. And this is, I think, the approach that I want to take. And basically, we're gonna kill n8n, and I'm also really, unfortunately, happy about it, because this every workflow is getting so much RAM and so much memory and so much CPU until they finish. Maybe I've done something wrong, I don't know, but this is at the moment my current setup and it's not working for me. So I need to also change n8n. And I think with LangGraph, the whole idea would be that it's super light. I hope, we'll see. And I also think that it can enable the application to be scalable for multiple users to run their workflows at the same time. Okay, but now the problem is the actual work, I would say. Sure. Okay, so this is our new architecture. But I also don't know really how detailed should I break it. Because for example, the pipeline, the block generation pipeline, it needs its own, let's say, resources with scraping. It needs, yeah, so should it be part of the block generation or should I make it into a separate one? I think it would make sense to put it like as it is, like just the whole logic, like getting the resources, and based on those resources just create some blocks. I think this could also be part of the block generation service. Okay. The question is, should I develop it now or should I do it later? Okay, let's also have a look at their AI assistant. What would be the scalable alternative for n8n workflows? I want to every user be able to run their own workflow, and the overhead of one workflow is too much, let alone 10 users at the same time. So let's see what our AI assistant tells us just to hear new ideas. But then also the question is, for example, the block generation. Should we create a multiple repo? For example, let's say we put the block generation pipeline in a separate repo and then basically everything on a separate repository and different settings. I'm also not sure about it. Notification. It's saying for now temporal. What's temporal? Durable execution solution. But this is okay. Example, let's sleep for 30 days. But then the question is, does it release the memory and resources? Because if you sleep resource, then they are basically still in the memory, right? Okay, yeah, it says temporal, but let's say, what's that? Yeah, to be honest, I'm interested in self-hosted, and what about, for example, LangGraph? Okay. So now with the lang graph, let's see what happens. Use cases. Deploys pipelines together, takes off any failure scenario out of the box. Detection across the number of distribution data. Okay. It says lang chain plays a different role. The lang graph. It plays a different role than n8n and temporal. And lang graph is basically an agent native state machine with built-in checkpoints, streaming, human in the loop. So you still want a queue database and thin API layer around it to hit your multi-tenant concurrency goal. When lang graph makes sense, agent control, loops, and branching. For example, tool use, retries, reflect, act, check. And this is perfect for this. It persists state, the checkpoint, basically one state is passed to the next one from node to node. And open source library, embed engine in your service and your own. Okay, Python and JavaScript. Okay, the difference between lang graph and n8n or temporal. Compared to n8n, far better density for AI agents because it isn't one long-lived node pipeline per user. You get resumable steps with DB-backed state, but you must bring Postgres, Redis, and your API authentication layer. Compared to temporal is a general durable workflow engine with strict determinism and industrial SLA knobs. What does industrial SLA mean? That's, what? Okay. Anyway, LangGraph is agent native and embraces non-deterministic LLM workflow, like the interrupts, human input, graph cycle. Many teams pair them, LangGraph inside, temporal plain queues outside. Orchestration. Scalable self-hosted blueprint. Runtime, LangGraph server container, stateless replicas behind an API gateway. State is saved in Postgres. And production. At production level, Redis task queue, ingress and auth. Throw auth in front, gateway service mesh. Service mesh, I also heard it. The Salon server. Okay. Data enforce row level security. Kubernetes name or per tenant pool if you need hard isolation. Concurrency control, throttle capacity per run overhead is dominated by model / tool calls on the graph engine. The engine checkpoint to Postgres each step. Size of DB IPS according to what shortest queue depth. Line graph offers the SQLite for the local autonomous Postgres for prod. Long-running agents can leak memory and do them like demons, preferably short step, frequent checkpoints, and idle timeouts. The queue rehydrate state when steps frequent checkpoints further zooms. Oh yeah. Pure AI agent product, self-hosted, fast iteration, line graph server plus Postgres plus Redis. Heavy compliance, memory non-LLM step, many non-LLM steps. Line graph inside temporal or CB activities. You want minimal control plane, deploy the standalone server and bring your own auth gateway. Okay, a bit confusing to be honest. Now this says agent orchestrate reliable, long-running, and human-in-the-loop agents for data against hallucination and rate limit. Scale to millions of agents. Locality and context awareness, monitoring calls. Reliable interaction across LLMs and gather data across multiple data stores. Easily scheduled document ingestion. Content engineering, orchestrate reliable data engineering pipeline to ensure your agent has necessary information to create context for making the right decisions. You can write a prompt, run it, and if something comes back that is not good, temporal just throws the error and it will get retired. It will get retried. We are able to work with the agent again and again. It was really painful to do this without the workflow approach. I think for us, the workflow approach with temporal was good because in the end, all LLMs are use cases or workflows. Yeah, I don't know. Like the question that I have at the moment is like temporal. We'll do it with line graph. Customer service. This is also temporal cloud, so that's a. I think that's a big question. If I go with, for example, let's say pricing. What the hell is this? Basically, they are selling resources. The role, service account, cookies. I think in the end, the overhead would be really important for us. Because, for example, look at this. $500 per month. There's also this one, ZB. Workflow engine. But it's also cloud-based. Yeah, I think this is cloud-based, right? Get a free account to try now cloud. To be honest, I'm not really sure. I think I'm gonna find the resource solutions. Technology. Self-managed. Download to install on your own machine. Okay, so PM. Concurrency. Ah, yeah. It says keep the agent's brain in LangGraph. Schedule, supervise it with outer orchestration. Showcase, I've started to dig deep into the whole agentic AI space. The question that kept coming back to me is around frameworks like LangChain, LangGraph, Temporal. Can temporal boxes be as powerful as those frameworks? Would it be easy to relatively compared to the framework. Beyond Q&A, understand the around the experience of those who have tried this. No reply. Heavy compliance, many non-LLM steps. I mean, how many non-LLM steps do I have? Outer orchestrator. But then temporal beyond chatbots with durable MCP code workflow temporal layer. Agent model instruction. This is also OpenAI. Oh yeah. It's a bit confusing at the moment. I will try to look it up later, maybe next week. And yeah, I think we have to make a decision to what to do basically. This agentic part would be this topic is the out orchestrator. Multi-layered product is a durable timer. Go tell us back off retries and clear solution while the thing like you have to stay on the agent brain. Durable timers. smart concurrent runs, and token, trade gaps. What's the verse? Driven timers. Simultaneously. Activity. It's a great graph sense in time. I feel like I'm not reading English, to be honest. I am. Yeah, to be honest, it doesn't feel like English anymore. Yeah, I'm gonna call this off, I would say. Call it a night. But yeah, interesting. To be honest, I thought that a LangChain would be almost like the obvious option. But now we have some other options we have to kind of work around. The thing is that, for example, for LangGraph, I have this like personal experience a bit. So I think this would be something that I'm comfortable with. But if I go with LangGraph or even temporal, I'm not sure about the overhead. So how this turns out, it's also a question, I would say, and also the scalability. But yeah, I think I will put a pin in it for now and make a decision later, but I'm kind of glad that we already have done this part. So yeah, it's now more clear for me what we need, what's going on. So and yeah, we continue it basically next time. Yeah, also then have a good night. I will jump off and enjoy the rest of the day or night that you have, and see you later. But this is really interesting, I would say. I mean, next time there's many options to learn and to look at. So stay tuned. Thank you. Bye bye.